Hello, everybody, and welcome to this Rand Europe webinar. Is it too late to say Happy New Year? I'm going to say it anyway, Happy New Year, and thank you very much for joining us today to discuss how Europe can prepare for the arrival of artificial general intelligence. My name is Ben Horton, and I'm the head of communications at Rand Europe. AGI, artificial intelligence systems that match or exceed humans at most economically useful cognitive work, may arrive between 2030 and 2040, or even sooner. A new RAND Europe report that was produced in collaboration with the Centre for Future Generations and a set of leading European experts on AI has found that Europe is currently underprepared for the economic and societal transformations that this technological advance will drive. But how exactly could AGI reshape global power dynamics? And what can be done to build Europe's preparedness? And how, more broadly, can the European Union, its member states, and wider Europe balance innovation, competitiveness, and security in this emerging domain? I'm thrilled today to be able to welcome three of the authors of this report to discuss these questions. Max Nagele is a senior analyst with RAND Europe's Science and Emerging Technology Group. Bengusu Özcan is an advanced AI researcher at the Centre for Future Generations, and Afek Shamir is an analyst also within the SET group at RAND Europe. Before we kick off this discussion, I have a few points of housekeeping. This event is taking place on the record and is being live streamed on the RAND Europe LinkedIn page. We will publish a recording in the coming days on our website for any colleagues who you think might be interested, so keep an eye out for that. And we will have a decent amount of time today for Q&A from the audience. So if you'd like to share a comment or a question, please do so by typing it in the QA box at the bottom of your screen. And now on to the discussion. I wanted to turn first to Bengusu to talk timelines. In the report, you argue that the likelihood of AGI emerging between 2030 and 2040 is growing. But could you unpack that a bit more for us? Can you tell us more about the trajectory and the development timeline as we move towards AGI becoming a reality?
Yes, of course. And it's great that you actually open this with timelines because when we talk about likelihoods, people usually really want to hear one single answer, which is exactly what we try to address in this question, that we need to think more about timelines and trajectories. And indeed, what we find is a important and big plausibility that artificial general intelligence can arrive in the upcoming decade between 2030 and 40. So to unpack this, what makes this more meaningful, maybe we need to look into two parts. One, what is this thing coming up? What is artificial general intelligence? What or how we define it? And what evidence kind of makes us say that or come up with that confidence? So AGI is a very contested term. In the past couple of years, it got a lot more attraction. But we needed to start with a more pragmatic definition. So if you're talking to mostly a policy audience, what brings the most meaningful or action-oriented definition, which is why we came up with AI that can be as good or surpassing human capability at most economically meaningful cognitive tasks where the disruption or transformation can come the most. But if anybody actually reads the report from this audience, what we want actually you to leave with is the understanding that this is more of a spectrum of changes rather than a single decisive point in time. So AGI actually is capable to progress towards many different fields, and we see capable to progress being quite different in physical tasks versus cognitive domains. Then, of course, the question comes, okay, if this is that uncertain, how can we even talk about like certain timelines or certain things being important? Can we not talk about important signals, especially for less tech-savvy audiences? We try to address that as well. There are certain points in time or certain capabilities that can also work as an accelerator for other capabilities. For instance, in the report, we unpack how AI actually helping out with AI research itself can unlock capabilities also quite faster. At least just this week in Davos, there was also tech CEOs conversations about how already AI is writing most of their codes. It doesn't mean that AI became the researcher, but it means that it's going to make the trajectories or capabilities probably quite faster than in the past. So again, to sum up here, AGI is actually more of a trajectory with different disruptions coming in different time scales. That's why we're talking more about a timeline here. And the second part, obviously, like what makes us confident that this plausibility is quite imminent. Of course, we just mentioned AI is already being used. We don't only look into like certain statements, or we don't only look in the past, but we really try to provide a big technical assessment paired with also playing the devil's advocate. What if questions, like what if actually things change? What we did in this report is really first look in the past. What draw in the capability kind of progress in AI in the first place? What was the big input? The data, larger models, larger computing investments and infrastructure that made these models plausible, brought an almost parallel capability unlocking. So that's why we saw this big acceleration. But it doesn't guarantee that this will continue. So first, we looked into the evidence that indeed, if there is continuous investment, capabilities can be unlocked, and there is actually a lot of appetite and investment already. So that's one plausibility. But we also ask the question, what if? What are the big technical questions and barriers? And is there sufficient technical evidence or expert opinion that indeed these are feasible to be overcome? We didn't only look into evidence on this, but we also tried to gather expert opinions, surveys, or like what statements people brought together. So this kind of made us confident to say that there is a big plausibility that AGI, this level of technology, can be unlocked in the coming decade. And as you pointed out, this report is like less about that maybe, but kind of using this as a step to ask the main question. Why do we ask this? So something being plausible in the next decade, like what does it mean? Because we talk about a very big disruption that needs a lot of preparedness, not only in one domain, but across many different domains. Saying that there is a big plausibility in the coming decade actually kind of urges us to take the necessary steps from today. That's why we put a lot of kind of emphasis on this being plausible is already a big deal, and it has many different implications.
That's great. Thank you so much. And I want to get into the implications absolutely and what we can do to prepare for those or respond to those. But if I could just hold you on the point of around timelines and I think you set out there the kind of state of play really helpfully. But I wondered if you could tell us a bit, take us a bit into um, the factors that might speed that process up or slow that process down? Are the obstacles to AGI based around kind of, is it about the science? Is it that we just don't know how to do it yet? Or is it about the kind of infrastructure of doing it? We kind of know the process by which it will be achieved, but it's going to take time to build up the kind of compute capacity, but also other kind of
Mhm.
infrastructural factors. Give us your sense of, what are the kind of things that could mean this happens quicker or
Mhm.
slower?
Yeah, so there is definitely no easy answer to this. But just to put a bit up a framework, there could be two paths, maybe if we simplify things. One is if we could just put the resources that we've been putting, could we get more capability? So this is more of a can we scale the infrastructure more questions? If we just threw more data or compute, do we have the resources and can we do this? So what we see here is yes, it is plausible that we will still be able to build up bigger compute infrastructures, train ever larger models. We will be able to still collect more meaningful quality data or generate new data. So, and there is also parallel investments in terms of giant data centers, especially in certain parts of the world, as we'll speak today. Um, there are, of course, some barriers to it as well. Are we going to be able to expand the energy infrastructure to actually support this? So one way of talking about this is, will more resources bring capabilities? There is effort to actually try that. So that's one way. The other way is perhaps this will not be able to unlock capabilities across all domains because indeed some of the domains are more messy for requiring us to do more sophisticated AI systems or AI systems that actually get benefit from different capabilities and unlock new paradigms. So this is a bit more like, are we at the technical stage or do we need more breakthroughs? This is another way. And we also see a lot of questions. I don't want to get into technical details, but just to give a name, for instance, right now, once you come up with a big AI model, it does not continue to learn as humans learn on the go. So this model does not get new capabilities unlocked in its foundations, or it starts to collapse, or it starts to lose some capabilities, to very like simplify this in a way. This is a big scientific challenge that big companies are trying to solve, bringing best talent together and trying to come up with new paradigms. And what we see is, by the help of AI actually trying to help them answer questions, we would also be able to see acceleration in kind of solving these scientific questions as well. So to sum up, we might be able to scale the models, or we might have some big scientific questions that today's great minds are quite willing to and already resourced to try to solve. And these are both adding on to that plausible scenario in the coming decade.
Can
Thank you
I
so
jump
much.
in there?
Yeah, sure, please.
So these are all great points. I completely agree with everything that Bengusu said. Um, yeah, I think there's other factors that people have mentioned as to like, okay, um, do current approaches have like fundamental limitations? Could we hit like unexpected technical walls that will just basically leave AI progress stagnating? There's questions about like an AI bubble, and if an AI bubble could burst, and if an AI bubble bursts, does that translate to, diminished capabilities? Um, I could say some of my takes on some of these. In my opinion, so the direction of travel is quite clear. I think the hitting a wall narrative, I think there's like a lot of really good points there, and we could speak about it, I think, for a while. But I think oftentimes it focuses a lot on like the pre-training, which is like the pre-training scaling. So add compute, add data, and get a really good model out of it. And so far, it's worked quite well. Um, but I think a lot of the times we miss like the shift towards inference time compute. So, the emergence of reasoning models that we've seen like O1 and coding agents. And we're constantly finding like new scaling paradigms, even if we do find over time that pre-training has some diminishing returns. So that's why I'm a little bit, skeptical over these kind of arguments. But I think the general thing that I would leave with this, section of the report that speaks about AGI timelines is, even if there's, like a 20 or 30% chance of AGI level systems by, 2035 or 2040, um, I think the consequences are so significant that Europe can't afford to just assume it won't happen. And generally, I think timeline discussions are super useful. But I do want to also, push back a little bit on the idea of putting like a specific year, and I think we did that in the report quite a few times. I think governments don't generally handle like strategic risks like this, so we don't wait for pandemics to come before funding vaccine platforms, sorry. I mean, we have in the past, but we should not do that. We shouldn't wait for meteorologists to predict exactly when a storm will come to start preparing. These are questions of probabilities, and in my opinion, the direction of travel is quite clear, like improving capabilities.
Avik, thanks so much for that. Yeah, and yeah, totally point taken on uh, the kind of probability versus preparedness kind of question that we have here. Um, Max, I wondered if I could bring you in to this conversation, and just to pick up on some of the points that have been raised already. But just, I mean, let's say Afek's right, and we're talking about a 20% chance that this happens. Could you at least give us a sense of, what the potential scale of the disruption that we're talking about is? Like, what, is this something, as we've mentioned, there's a lot of talk about bubbles, and are the potential implications of this overstated? And but what's the kind of level of potential impacts that we're talking about that you considered in the report?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. And again, there's no sort of like very simple answer to it, obviously. Maybe a first distinction I want to draw is that between AGI emerging on a small scale versus AI emerging on a large scale or like global scale. Mm. So we use this threshold of AGI and like reaching AGI because we think it's a useful framework to structure our thoughts on potential thresholds that might be important. But depending on what you mean by reaching AGI, the consequences might be quite different. So to mention maybe two archetypal examples, one example might be a world in which you reach AGI in the sense that, let's say, Google DeepMind has a system in one of their data centers that matches human level capabilities, and maybe they also achieve that in the robotic realm, depending on the definition you want to choose. But this system is extremely expensive to run. It's much more expensive to run than a human, and it's not really scalable because there isn't enough inference compute globally to really deploy this on a mass scale. So it's maybe deployed for very specific niche applications in national security or research or something like that. So that is one way of reaching AGI, which would be potentially less consequential. So we reach AGI, but it's confined to some data center somewhere and like used for very specific tasks. But the labor market impacts would be pretty negligible because it's too expensive to run, and there wouldn't be like a broad distribution. So the world with that would basically look very similar to the world we're currently living in, except maybe that some people would be even more alarmed by this. A second scenario, which I can maybe outline, which is also a bit sort of an archetype, is that of large scale and broadly applied AGI across the economy and the military. And I think this is more the scenario that we're actually looking into at the paper, where we kind of make the implicit assumption that AGI will not only be developed, but it will be broadly deployed by major states and will play an important role. And there are a lot of empirical uncertainties, obviously, between these scenarios. It very much depends on how useful AGI is and what tasks will be useful. But let's say we're assuming a scenario here in which AGI is deployed in like a big multiplicity, so not just one AGI system, but countless and countless AGI systems that work at 10 times or 100 times human speed, that can do all kinds of tasks that humans can do, and maybe better. And it's basically intelligence on tap, too cheap to meter, so to say. I mean, I think Dario Amodei the CEO of Anthropic, has put this as a country of geniuses in a data center that is at your disposal, that you can direct at certain things. And we can discuss how credible statements by company CEOs are, but if we get this kind of scenario of broadly deployed AGI, this might have two broad consequences. So first of all, there might just be an enormous economic advantage from these systems. Why? Because economic growth, to a large extent, is the result of population, not only obviously, but if you have more people and more workers that can do useful work, then you just get an economic benefit. And these workers are not just, let's say, like more, but they're also maybe better than most humans. And they're a lot faster than most humans. So there might be this multiplying effect of just, it might be really useful to just have your armies of AGIs doing all kinds of things for you. So this is useful for the economy. And to the degree that it also diffuses into the rest of the economy and the different companies, might just like lead to GDP growth much faster than if you don't have AGI, or like at least the capacity to like deploy AGI that is developed elsewhere in your economy. And maybe in the second dimension, this is obviously connected to the economic argument, but this might also apply to the military domain, where there are lots of benefits to doing things quickly, integrating information from a lot of sources at the same time. Let's say if you're in a complicated conflict situation, you have some intelligence from this side, you have a lot of data on the ground that you need to analyze, and you need to synthesize all of that into real-time decisions about like where to apply force and where to do what. And AGI systems might just be extremely good at that. They might be good at like assimilating information, like gathering it from different areas and integrating that into one synthesized sort of decision relevant picture for military decision making. They might be integrated into all kinds of military systems. I mean, we already see drone swarms nowadays. We might just get much better drone swarms at some point. with AGI and maybe just completely new paradigms of weapons that will be developed based on the research that we get from AGI. So to summarize, there will be economic advantages and military advantages, and these will primarily benefit the countries that have the inference capacity and compute to deploy these systems, and also who develop these systems to some extent, because they can then decide who gets them and who doesn't get them. And that will might lead just to like a a change in the global balance of power based on access to AGI. And yeah, that's maybe one dimension. And then there's a second dimension, which is very important, which is the risk dimension and the sort of global security implications of this. But maybe I will first leave it with this.
No, that's really helpful. Thank you so much, Max. And it actually brings us quite neatly onto the kind of geopolitical positioning that we wanted to get into in this webinar. And Afek, I was going to throw that back to you if I may. Obviously, the report goes into some detail on Europe's position in this process, and its skin in the game, I guess. And obviously, this is a transformation that's being driven primarily by the United States and to some extent in China as well. But where does Europe stand today in terms of its own sort of skin in the game and capacities to influence this process?
Yeah, yeah, happy to take that one. So I'll start with the kind of headline statement that we write in the report, and basically we argue that Europe is underprepared for a world or a transition to AGI. Um, and in my opinion, it doesn't mean we like throw in the towel. We just need to be honest about where we stand and what we have to do to retain agency and sovereignty in how we build and govern tech. So. Yeah, I think in terms of Europe's skin in the game, we I guess define it as like preparedness, but by preparedness we mean a lot of different things. I think we kind of separate it into three neat buckets, and those are one, do EU and member state institutions have enough strategic awareness to understand and anticipate AI developments? Um, and the second thing that we looked at is maybe closer to the geopolitical positioning, but is the EU competitive? And does it have enough leverage over the AI value chain in order to influence basically how AI is being developed and governed? And then the final thing that we looked at is has Europe developed robust and ambitious policy strategies? So I wish I could run through all of this. I think it was better maybe to explain Europe's positioning and kind of competitive positioning and leverage that it has over the AI value chain. So I think the first kind of clear area is, does Europe have indigenous frontier model capabilities? And the answer is yes, but it is lagging. So Europe's best model lags the kind of frontier models by around 6 to 12 months. And then if we look at compute, the story isn't much better. So Europe doesn't currently have enough compute to kind of train and deploy large-scale frontier models, and it's far behind the US and China on compute. So it only has 5% of the global AI compute capacity in the world, as opposed to the US's 75% and China's 14%. And then there's like a lot of other things that really matter. Energy is more expensive in Europe than in the US. Then if we look at talent, Europe trains really good AI talent, but loses a lot of its best people to the US, where resources are just higher. Um, and then if we look at capital, I mean, we know that training frontier AI models is just super capital intensive. Training costs are growing at something anywhere between 2 to 3 x per year. And Europe struggles exactly with this, right? So like, patient capital and acquiring basically institutional capital, through pension funds and so on. Um, and overall, if I look at all of this, I would say the picture isn't very bright. But I think we also need to clarify where Europe does have some leverage, some capabilities that it could become more interdependent with other countries and get really stronger on the AI value chain. So I think the first thing that is really worth mentioning here is that every advanced AI chip in the world, with the partial exception of a few, Huawei, like recent Huawei chips, is produced using EUV machines made by the Dutch company ASML. So they have a complete monopoly over these machines. A lot of people say that they're the most complex machine that humans have ever created. And we know that China is trying to develop them, but I mean, experts say that they're still a few years behind. So in the near term, this is huge leverage that the EU has, even if it comes with some limitations. So we know that ASML is built based on some US technology and US expertise, so it also has to follow US FDPR rules, which is the US's export control regime. But it is, something that's worth stating. The second thing that I think really matters here is, and I think this is almost always forgotten, but the EU single market is huge, right? So the EU single market is the world's second largest economic area. It's roughly 20% of global GDP. And you can really use this as leverage. So I think the first thing that you can do, and this has already been done, but use the Brussels effect. So steer how a technology is being governed by setting different compliance costs and steering companies towards particular behaviors. And then the second thing you can do is if you really care about acquiring capabilities that you don't already have, you can directly negotiate for these. So the EU market is just huge, and with that comes a lot of bargaining power. Um, and then the final thing, if I can just step in to this discussion, I'm curious to hear what the others say, but um, the the kind of competition on diffusing the technology is just not won by any country so far. So this is an argument that Professor Jeffrey Dink gives. Um, but we know that, for example, if we look at other general purpose technologies, Britain invented electricity, but it was really Germany and the US that found out how to adopt the technology better and diffuse the technology more widely. And they managed to benefit much more. So this could happen with AI as well. General purpose technologies take a while to diffuse, and Europe basically just has to find better ways to find strategic ways that it can adopt the technology and get others to rely on it for. Um, so overall, mixed picture, I'd say Europe is underprepared overall, but there's some positives to look up to.
Yeah, thank you so much, Afek. I don't know, Bengusu or Max, would you like to add anything to what Afek was saying there?
Um, a small note, maybe not on the preparedness side, as Afek gave a lot of details, but one thing that we also try to urge with this work is it all also starts with recognition and awareness, right? Like situational strategic awareness of this can be another game changer technology, and this is potentially something that will unlock a new economic infrastructure. First, recognizing that at the political level and kind of situating this technology. A thing that I always have kind of like with my close circle, especially if they're not really working directly in the field, is if you start things with ChatGPT's launch and see this more as a American company games, bubble rhetorics, and is this just another technology that US companies are trying to monopolize or kind of like create compromise areas? Um, this is mostly a product discussion, maybe, or as FX said, yes, there will be certain bubble burst type of dynamics where we will see maybe some market corrections or some companies will be impacted. I think we need to take a step back as Europe and see that this technology has decades of progress towards a kind of what we call AGI as a goal, but towards a trajectory that can be quite game changing. So recognizing this technology as it is and as its transformative kind of past and the future, I think changes Europe's approach to this as well and the potential impact that it can bring. I think on top of all the aspects that FX said, it really does start with creating an awareness and a different read of this technology that is different from headlines or what different maybe power struggles can be trying to pull the strings towards.
Yeah, if you can briefly add to that as well. Yeah, I agree that strategic awareness is really upstream of absolutely everything, which is why the usual thing I recommend to governments is to build this capacity at the highest levels of government. The UK AC has been an incredible example of this in terms of really creating a shared set of facts and also creating a center of expertise in the UK to really inform their approach to AI policy. And for this reason, my personal opinion is that that continental Europe has a lot to learn from the UK in terms of strategy and yeah, the approach to sort of AGI preparedness. I also want to mention, because we've been talking a lot about competitiveness in a sort of conventional sense, that a very big concern here is also just the fundamental and partly existential risks from artificial intelligence. So yes, we are, as Europe, our sovereignty is threatened, and that is something that we should think about. But there's also risks from abuse of AI capabilities by terrorist groups, malicious misuse. There's lots of control risk. There are all kinds of this technology is not something that we yet understand or can control, and there's an extremely dangerous global, let's say, competition. I mean, you can debate whether we're an actual race, but certainly people seem to think that this will be really important, and there might be very strong incentives to develop this technology in a way that's just not safe for anyone. And like winning this race doesn't help anyone if the externalities are just lethal to like everyone. And Europe, fortunately, has taken an extremely responsible approach to this via the AI Act and the Code of Practice. And maybe the thing that I want to highlight here is that we need to make sure that these rules can continue to be enforced. So the AI Act rules already have a massive effect on the companies that develop frontier AI currently. They're adjusting their safety frameworks. They're introducing new types of checks on what's happening. But these things can only be enforced as long as Europe has bargaining power against the United States. And as Afak mentioned, the single market is still very powerful. It will remain powerful, but we might not be able to rely that the leverage that we currently have will remain valuable enough in the future to really enforce these rules, especially as AGI becomes more of a thing or maybe arrives. And so, to some extent, the whole question around sovereignty and competitiveness is also to some extent tied to the risk mitigation. I'm not saying that Europe should, you know, jump to push the frontier as fast as possible and like race in an irresponsible way. But I think some minimum degree of sovereignty is just important for making sure that the rules that we think are important and the values that we think are important are followed by the main actors. And so, yeah, there's like a connection here that I wanted to highlight.
Yeah, thanks, Max. And I wonder, this is going to potentially sound like a pretty layman's question from an expert's perspective, but often in kind of public debates about AI, there is this kind of opposition or binary that's established between safety and harnessing this innovation, and a sense that you can overregulate these things and you'll miss out on all the potential economic benefits, or you can just have this total Wild West. Everyone's, some people are making money out of it, but the effects are totally uncontrolled. Um, how helpful is that sort of binary framing? It feels like from the answer you were just giving there that actually you have to be able to do both in tandem. But is it? I mean, is that binary something that you recognize, or is it more just we're talking about just sort of balancing across a kind of spectrum of actions and approaches?
Yeah, I think binaries are rarely useful. And I've rarely seen useful binaries. There are a couple of different binaries we can talk about here. Maybe one very common view that maybe some people hold is that there's a strong contradiction between regulating a technology and being competitive. So in particular, the AI Act has sometimes been cited as not helpful for European competitiveness, or sometimes even as the cause of Europe's current lack of competitiveness. I personally think that those claims are often overstated. So I think it's clearly wrong that the AI Act is responsible for making Europe competitive in the first place. The rules of the AI Act, certainly the ones on general purpose AI, have only started to apply very recently, and Europe's competitiveness in frontier AI hasn't been there for many, many years before that. So it cannot really be the case that that's the reason why Europe isn't competitive. The much more likely reason why it's not competitive is what Afak mentioned, the capital markets, the yeah, the venture capital availability, the energy and the computing power background conditions that Europe has. So those are the things that we should work on. And I think compliance with a bunch of, especially the general purpose AI rules, is really not that hard for big companies. So yeah, they need to make a safety framework. They probably need to hire a few FTE to then actually like go through all of the procedures that the AI Act wants of them. But it's really not that hard. It's perfectly feasible for these companies to apply with these rules and at the same time be competitive. So I think that's just wrong. You can talk about the high risk regulations in the AI Act as maybe more difficult because they more affect SMEs and like smaller companies. But certainly on the frontier competition, I think there's like no contradiction here. And like the main levers for making Europe competitive really aren't just deregulating everything and then automatically something will happen. Certainly not the AI regulations. Um, yeah, so that's maybe one thing. And there's definitely a controversial debate around the argument that I just made that there needs to be some degree of competitiveness in order for Europe to enforce its rules. There are some very respected voices that say building any technology that might kill everyone and might just lead to horrible, horrible outcomes is not something that we should do ever. It's just not acceptable. Like we cannot, as Europe with our values, meaningfully engage in this at all and feel good about it. And I understand these arguments and I have some sympathy with them. But my personal opinion is that if Europe doesn't retain some minimum amount of capabilities and competitiveness, then we will just get overruled by basically the rest of the world. And yeah, cannot play a meaningful role in influencing the way that AI is governed. But yeah, that's certainly like an interesting discussion that maybe deserves more attention.
Yeah, thank you very much. And thank you for breaking down these binaries for us. I mean, this has been a real fascinating kind of scene setter and a survey of kind of where we are. But obviously, I wanted to spend some time before we move to Q&A talking about what should be done and where does Europe go from here. And I wondered, Bengisu, if I could come to you first. Could you maybe set out a little the kind of main takeaways from the report on this? So obviously, the kind of headline recommendation in the report is that Europe needs some sort of kind of strategic preparedness plan for this area. What would that achieve? What would the process of doing that mean for Europe?
Yes, and I'll reiterate what I just shared previously that this actually targets a high level buy-in or awareness. The report analogy that we made in the report actually stems from Draghi report, which kind of set this Europe's place in the world and competitiveness as at the very high level technical, political, let's say stage. So the reason that we try to package this up with like kind of like a warning call type of idea is let's first establish this political priority and try to then get this buy-in from multiple leaders who are trying to actually achieve a European level, let's say, step change together. So that's why we call for a report or like one kind of wake-up call type of moment. And another reason that we need something like this is, as Max said, there is not one single solution. This is such a cross-cutting technology that we need reforms that touch on both markets and also infrastructure, but also skills and preparing for perhaps a new tax or kind of welfare system regime. And these all like kind of needs to be kind of developed from different units and multiple countries. So the plan or the preparedness across all these kind of require with like first, let's put this on the agenda of all of these actors who need to be coordinated and then define more granular actions or policy options that to achieve this. So to give a very kind of short answer, the main reason is like one, to set up the right prioritization across multiple leaders, and two, each different unit that kind of work independently actually need to work in tandem for this. And we need this level of awareness and prioritization to achieve that level of coordination.
Thank you so much. Afek, Max, I don't know if you'd like to add anything to this or around kind of actions and where we go from here.
Yeah, I'm happy I could delve a little bit more into what we suggest. the report and the strategy has to look at. And I think that the first kind of thing, there's three things, right? So the first thing is, how does Europe capture economic benefits from AI while remaining sovereign? So this is like a really kind of broad, very challenging question that we see, asked quite a lot. And it basically requires making choices that are really, really difficult between generally what should Europe have domestic control over versus what things, should be procured and how should they be procured from other states. The second thing is something like, how do how does Europe prepare its institutions and societies in the case of, rapid changes? So these could be labor changes, these could be security changes. Um, and the way that we kind of argue for how this can happen is to dramatically kind of upgrade Europe's strategic awareness capacity. So this might include resourcing the AI office with more funding. It might include, starting similar units to the ones that the UK AC has. There's plenty of ideas there. The third thing is, and this one I think is low-hanging fruit. I think this one is on strengthening international stability. So this one is, how does Europe articulate a vision for global AI governance, and how does it actively pursue it with well-aligned countries through active diplomacy? And the EU already has quite a head start here. So I think the Code of Practice is a trailblazing piece of legislation, and the AI Act is a trailblazing piece of legislation. And other countries are looking at the EU for leadership. And I think this is an area that is low-hanging fruit. So these are the three buckets that we really recommend a report and a strategy should really look to solve.
Yeah, maybe if I can add like a last touch to this before we start into the Q&A. There's a valid response here which says, why a report? Why not just like concrete recommendations? And that's fair because the EU already has a reputation for being slightly bureaucratic and maybe having too many reports on things. We think in this case, we're just really not sure actually what to recommend in a bunch of ways. And like it's just very difficult. So for two reasons. On the one hand, the stakes are extremely large. So sometimes decisions require investments of double-digit billions in compute, let's say, or extreme diplomatic and international measures on AGI if you're being serious about it. And on the other hand, it just is very cross-cutting. So it doesn't just concern foreign policy, it doesn't just concern economic policy, it concerns all of the policy areas at the same time, together with there being a fairly complex value chain that includes models and semiconductors and so on. And so there are certainly ideas that we have that we've been weighing, and like there are some active things that we think would probably make sense to do. But we really wanted to focus in on this one recommendation of first sense making and really thinking from first principles, what is actually going on here in the technology and what follows from that, because we think that is exactly what's missing right now. There are like lots of separate kind of strategies that lots of people are doing in different ministries, different DGs in the EU that just really don't work together. And that's really the point we want to drive home. Like it needs to be thought from first principles in all of Europe, clearly tied to technologies and timelines. And then we can like talk about very specific proposals. But we want to highlight that this doesn't mean that all the work on concrete things should stop. We should continue thinking about concrete policy proposals and gigafactories and all of those things. And there's useful work to be done here. We just really wanted to highlight that there needs to be like a grand strategy, so to say, on this topic.
Yeah, absolutely. Message loudly received, and hopefully by everybody who reads the report. So I want to move into Q&A now, and we've got some great questions that have come in from the audience. Thank you so much. And if you've got more questions, please put them in the box, and we'll try and answer as many as possible. I think given the number, we won't have time to get everybody's thoughts on every question. But I wanted to turn first to a question that's come in from Daniel Heitzinger, who asks, is there any country worldwide that is actually prepared for AGI from a governance perspective? And obviously we've touched on in this discussion various ways, codes of practice, the AI Act that the EU has put in place is actually trying to do this work of developing a kind of governance system for these new technologies. But is there anywhere in the world that is doing it better or faster or uh, more effectively? I don't know if someone wants to take that first.
I think I can also jump in with how much capacity and resources you invest in foundational AI research on, or how much of a state capacity you see this being. UK was already given as an example that does this through UKAC, but I think if I'm not wrong, Canada was also kind of early on this to like put up a certain amount of money in this to be used for this purpose. I think Singapore in Asia, for example, is also one. Australia set up an AC recently. So these are, I think the short answer to this is seeing AI as a foundational technology that will change different, like entire systems from economy to welfare systems, and trying to invest in the foundations of this is a sign that we can see from that countries probably taking this at a strategic level rather than treating this more as a technology or just a product, and only keeping it at the regulatory realm.
That's really helpful. Thank you. We've got a relatively technical question here, I think, which has come in from Fabian Perchi. Thanks for the question, which is where in Europe, which AI research labs are developing open source or open weight models aimed at AGI level capabilities? And how do those systems compare to systems like GPT 5.2 or Google Gemini 3? So where is the kind of real thrust of this innovation coming in Europe?
I can take the
Sure, please,
question.
Max. Yeah.
The answer is none,
Mm.
because it kind of depends which paradigms you believe in. And obviously, if I knew the exact answer to this, I might be an investor and like make a lot of money out of it. But my current sense is that in continental Europe, there aren't any companies that do this. Maybe Mistral is one of the ones that are closest. Their models have been fairly competitive, but they are just not on the same level in terms of just sheer capabilities as OpenAI, Anthropic, and the other US players. And I think unless, at least under the current paradigm, unless we see similar investments in computing power, similar talent densities as in Silicon Valley, and similar economic policies as we see currently in the US, I think it's very unlikely that any European lab will or company will develop AGI capabilities. Certainly not. And if they are open sourcing it, that's another question. I would be very much against open sourcing AGI. I think it would be catastrophic if we do this, because every terrorist group on Earth would then basically make use of this potentially. So yeah, that's sort of like my two-part answer to this question.
I can also maybe add like a little bit more clarification. So I don't think Mistral has ever said they're seeking to develop AGI. Um, and then the other thing is Mistral makes both open source and proprietary models. Um, but yeah, I completely agree with Max. The answer currently is none. And I mean, I don't know if the answer should be, okay, so many European companies want to develop AGI. Um, I think our report is very much geared towards preparing governments, institutions, and societies. But I think competitive positioning is like a really important thing. But it doesn't necessarily mean Europe has to develop the leading frontier model. But I think that's a separate discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. We've got two, I think, to some extent related questions, and apologies in advance. They are going to require some kind of speculative stuff. We won't hold you to any kind of predictions that you make in this room. But we've got a question in here from Michelle Alamasi, who asks, "Do you think that the prospect, whether realized or not, of armed confrontation involving EU countries would accelerate technological development towards AGI, or would it mean that this sort of development would be deprioritized, presumably due to other kind of funding concerns or the need to spend on kind of conventional defense?" And then Kika Doyle has also asked, I think, a related question, which is to what extent will capturing AGI development become a cause for direct intervention? Do we think, based on the work in the report, that AGI could be seen as serious enough as a kind of future security issue to warrant open conflict? So, a kind of conflict security that I mentioned to this. Who wants to have a first go?
I'm
I'm
happy to take
happy.
a
Yeah, no, go ahead, Max. I was happy to answer the second one. So
great.
you could take the
I
first
was
one.
taking a stab at the first one. So
Okay,
Nice,
cool.
thanks.
so the question, as I understand it, is asking if there's an armed conflict with Europe, potentially over Greenland, would that in some way accelerate development of AGI globally? That's sort of how I understand the question. So that depends on a couple of things. So first of all, it depends on how much AGI is perceived as a military asset and something that can potentially lead to very strong military advantages in the US. It's in the US because the US companies are currently most likely to develop AGI in the next couple of years. So there could be a causal chain where the US is going at war for some incomprehensible reasons with Europe, and that reinforces a narrative that yeah, there needs to be like even more military dominance than currently, and then AGI potentially is seen as one of the factors that lead to this military dominance. And maybe there's also increased funding by the military in AI development, which would then lead to a counterfactual speed up compared to the current trajectory, because maybe more data centers are being built or more energy is being invested. I don't see so much a causal path on the European side. I mean, you could maybe argue that the same would happen on the European side. Europeans think that AGI is important for sovereignty and defense, hence take more active steps, as we've seen in Davos by Commission President von der Leyen, maybe like unifying capital markets, building a lot of energy, building EU Inc. And then maybe that leads to more companies in the EU that actually then reach the frontier. So I could see a world in which that happens. I think it's maybe more likely than not that it will speed up things, but there are also lots of factors that might then just slow it down. So maybe actually people don't think AGI is that important, and maybe more funding goes into conventional military conflict compared to AI things. So it very much depends on how important do you think AGI is to defense, and then what does it imply on the different sides. So yeah, I mean, giving an answer to this would be very speculative, but it's yeah, it depends on a number of factors.
Cool. I think the second question I read it as something like, will a state that captures AGI will that cause a war? So that's kind of what I understood it as. And really, I think that the main risk here is US-China. So there was an interesting paper, I think it was written something like a year ago by now, called Mutually Assured AI Malfunction. It was with Dan Hendricks, Eric Schmidt, uh, and someone else who I forgot. Apologies to them. And the idea basically was if the US or China make a very clear advance towards AGI, um, that won't cause the kind of catastrophic risk that we might anticipate because there's a mutual deterrence that might happen there. So if the US has a clear kind of paving ahead, China might strike US data centers containing the given AI, and same the other way around. So this is a nuclear deterrence argument, basically. It says the same thing as what we knew during the Cold War, where if the USSR made a huge lead in nuclear warheads, the US would do the same, and they would kind of balance each other out because they know that they each pose an existential risk to each other. Um, there's a lot of arguments against this. But that is, an interesting way forward for people who argue that actually this won't cause a large-scale war. My personal take, and I'll go quite quickly, is that cyber attacks are just going to happen anyway, right? So states will interfere in each other's kind of AI development, even if we don't reach AGI. I think that the risk of kind of model weights being stolen is still high, even if we don't reach AGI. And that's something that I think is a risk and can lead to very serious geopolitical confrontations either way. Um, yeah, that's my how I generally see that question.
I will add one sentence to that.
Mm,
First of all, our own experts at RAND, who have thought a lot about deterrence basically since the 1950s, think that this deterrence regime that was described by Hendricks at Alter is not really going to work out for certain reasons that they explain. And I've linked the article in the chat if people are interested in that. And maybe a brief thing on just like, I think there's also a risk of yeah, if we think too much in terms of strategic deterrence, there's also a risk of maybe creating a self-fulfilling prophecy. So I think there's always the need to also, like, on the one hand, think about deterrence, but on the other hand, think about what if we just all agree and like create a big treaty that fixes it.
I'll just quickly add one thing. I kind of understood the first question almost similar to it. Analogy to nuclear weapons, like would actually conflict increase the like buy-in of certain countries, and here only a few that we're talking about. And I also don't want to be very speculative, and there is not sufficient evidence on like the military buy-in, but there is more building up. And just I think a few weeks ago, I don't know if Department of Defense, I'll say, because I think it's legally still called that. The United States government is actively investing in and been publishing memorandums on increasing AI experiments for military use. So there is that direction already. We really need to kind of monitor closely in this geopolitical atmosphere where it goes. So I don't also want to sound pessimistic, but there's enough evidence for us to think that countries are building towards that framing and understanding of this technology.
that's really helpful. Thank you. I'm conscious of time. There were two other questions that I wanted to get in if we can squeeze them in. And one which I think should be the subject of another webinar that we do in a couple of months, if everyone wants to come back and listen in. But the question there is from Alex Kratodomsky-Jones, who is basically wants us to bring in the China dimension to this question. China's been mentioned a couple of times in this conversation, in the context of kind of rivalry with the US. But how far behind in the race does the panel think China is behind the US, if at all? And how are their trajectories in this pursuit of AGI differing? Does anyone want to have a go at China quickly, and then come back for another round?
I will just say very briefly that personally, I'm not an expert on China's trajectory in AI. There are people at RAND who full-time research what's happening in China. My sense is that they are suffering quite a bit from export controls on chips.
Hmm.
The companies are just that's definitely a big bottleneck for them. Um, I am not an expert enough to really comment specifically on the capability profiles and trajectories of the most competitive Chinese companies, but certainly, yeah, semiconductor access and is a big issue for them.
Okay, thank you. So we'll convene an alternative panel as well to dig into that a bit more. So I want to leave us just with this final question. I'd be interested in all of the panel's thoughts on this, which is coming from Ryan Walshaw, which brings in whether there is an opportunity here for more kind of UK EU collaboration in this space. What agreements on AI preparedness, if any, have been made between the UK and EU, and how might this develop in the near future? Obviously, we've got people here based in Brussels and also based in London and Cambridge. So I'd love to just finish with maybe a sort of note of optimism, and where are the potentials for collaboration in this space. I don't know who would like to go first, but it'd be
I'm
great to hear
happy
from everyone.
to list a few ideas, and then I'm curious to hear what the others will say. But there's a few areas where even Brexit aside, the UK could still contribute to the EU's kind of projects. And I think one area is Euro HPC, so the building up of compute. That's an area where the UK and the EU can contribute and can collaborate together. I think another area is the EU, led by France and Germany, just launched the Frontier AI initiative. We still don't really know what that will entail, but the UK can show leadership and join in that and try yeah, try to join that sort of endeavor. And then there's, I think, things like mutual learnings, right? So the UKAC has tested leading US models, and it can teach, I think, the AI office a lot, and the AI office could do the same thing the way back because the UK doesn't have AI legislation, whereas the EU does, and the EU is regulating the AI Act and the Code of Practice and can teach mutual learning. So I think these are some areas that I see as the most kind of like high benefit scenarios.
I'll quickly jump in to say it's great that Afek laid out very concrete and mutually beneficial examples because I think especially now in this geopolitical climate where UK is also trying to play a balanced geopolitical power balance between the US and US's kind of position against the EU, it's way more challenging for all of these actors to kind of actually do value-based agreements. So it's quite important that, as FX said, there is action from Europe's end that is beneficial for UK as well to kind of be inviting. Or Europe needs to think a lot more kind of tactical and pragmatic in like what can be like positive sum here, what can we also put in here, rather than hoping more like value-based alignments. So we need to think about more like concrete and strategic terms, and FX gave great examples.
Yeah, I'll just underline all of these things. I think the learnings dimension is great. UK AC recently sent a delegation to Berlin to basically share some of their learnings with the German government on what's been happening with their AC. I know that the UAI office is looking at the UK. Some of the leading people there have been UK AC actually before they joined the UAI office. So the learning dimension is definitely there. And then also the competitive dimension. I mean, the EU clearly has more resources because it's a larger market, but the UK has Google DeepMind, which is an American company, but at least based with a headquarter in London. So they have just direct access to frontier AI capabilities. And that's maybe there are gains from trade here. I don't know. I personally would be very excited if there was closer EU-UK collaboration on this topic.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, all of you, for your thoughts and contributions. And thank you, everybody who joined us today for this webinar. Please, I would urge everybody still on the call to check out the report and read it in all its glorious detail. And I hope that we can have you all back at some point in the coming months to get a kind of status update on whether a preparedness report is in the works. All that remains for me to say is thank you, Afek, Max, Bengusu. Really appreciate your time, and everybody have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
Ben.
you.
Everyone.